Evolution and classification are two important branches of biology. One deals with figuring out how organisms evolve, how new species are born from old ones, and classification deals with figuring out how closely related two species are. Errors in DNA copying and sexual reproduction lead to variations which form the basis of evolution. Characteristics that are common in different kinds of living organisms provide evidence in favor of evolution. More characteristics two species have in common, the more closely related they are. Evolution, as we discussed earlier, is a naturally occurring, slow, continuous and irreversible process of change. Scientists rely more on similarities among organisms to develop classification easier. Charles Darwin, in his famous book The Origin of Species, wrote about evolution, in which he threw insights on evolution of species. Some important points of Darwin's theory of evolution are: organisms have unlimited capacity to reproduce. Organisms can reproduce offspring at a faster pace. This is necessary for survival because a higher number of offspring ensure that at least some of them could survive. Each organism has to struggle for its day-to-day survival. For example, a frog lays thousands of eggs at one go. The eggs are released in water and it is left to fend for itself. Most of the eggs are either washed away or eaten away by predators. However, some portion of the eggs develop into tadpoles. Once again, many tadpoles are eaten away by predators, leaving behind a few which develop into adult frogs. The modern system of classification is based on evolutionary relationships. Due to this, it is also known as phylogenetic classification. For example, all human beings can interbreed irrespective of their race or skin color. All human beings come under the class Mammalia, as do the monkeys, elephants and cows. Some of the important sources which provide evidences for evolution are: there are some common characteristics among some animals. These characteristics in different organisms would be similar because they are inherited from a common ancestor. For example, consider the fact that mammals have 4 limbs, as do birds, reptiles and amphibians. Observe the picture. Homologous organs. The basic limb structure is similar, but it has been modified to perform different functions in various organisms. Such a homologous characteristic helps to identify an evolutionary relationship between apparently different species. Organs which have same structural design but serve different functions in different animals are called homologous organs. The forelimbs of frogs are adapted to a jumping environment. Those of birds are used for flying and those of humans are used for handling tools, etc. This shows that frogs, birds and humans have evolved from a common ancestor. Analogous organs. Organs have different structural designs but serve a common function in different animals are called analogous organs. Wings of birds and wings of bats are good examples of a pair of analogous organs. Wings of birds are composed of all the bones of forelimb and are covered with feathers. Wings of bats are mainly composed of digital bones and a thin membrane covering the structure. Yet, wings in both the organisms are used for flying. Fossils. Fossils are another solid evidence for evolution. They are the preserved remains or impressions of living organisms that lived in the past. When living organisms die, their body decomposes, but some parts of their body may be in such an environment that they do not decompose. For example, if a dead insect gets caught in a hot mud, it will not decompose quickly, but the mud will harden and retain impressions of the body parts of the insects. There are different kinds of fossils, such as fossils found in tree trunks, shells, molds, preserved remains, impressions of body and footprints, and also remains of skeletons, etc. How do we know how old the fossils are? There are two components to this estimation. One is relative method. If we dig into the earth and start finding fossils, it is reasonable to suppose that the fossils we find closer to the surface are more recent than fossils we find in deeper layers. The second way is dating fossils, otherwise known as carbon dating method. It is done by detecting the ratios of different isotopes of the same element, that is isotope of carbon-14, which is radioactive in the fossil material. Significance of fossils. Fossils are formed layer by layer in Earth's crust. The animals and plants which existed earlier are buried in deeper layer. It is found that deeper fossils have a simpler structure than those found in the upper layer. Complete fossil record of animals like horse, camel, man has helped us to study the stages of evolution. Fossils also gives clues about past living things on earth, past climatic conditions. It shows us how living things have changed over time. The next topic to study is evolution by stages. Evolution is a continuous and gradual process. Complicated organs did not evolve by a single DNA change, but were formed bit by bit over generations. Take an example of our eye to understand the process of evolution. The complex organ, like our eye, has evolved from rudimentary organs. The eye is a complicated organ which cannot be generated by a single DNA change. The complex body organs of animals, such as eyes, have been created in stages over many generations. First of all, the basic eye, like that of a flatworm, which are simple eye spots that can detect light. After this, more complex eyes were evolved in many organisms. The structure of the eye in each organism is different. Sometimes an evolutionary change produced in an organism for one purpose later on becomes entirely different function. For example, birds evolved feathers as a means of providing insulation to their bodies in cold weather, but later became useful for the purpose of flying. Some dinosaurs had feathers, but they could not fly. This shows that birds are closely related to reptiles, since dinosaurs are reptiles. Organisms with different body structures evolved from a common ancestor, and they share a common ancestral design. It is through the process of artificial selection which led to the development of many species. Wild cabbage is an example of artificial selection. Let us check how different species evolved from one single wild cabbage. Selection of short distances between the leaves had led to the formation of cabbage that we eat. Selection for swollen stems had formed kohlrabi. Selection for larger leaves have formed leafy vegetable kale. Selection for colored leaves formed the red cabbage. Evolutionary evidence can be traced by studying molecular phylogeny of an organism. Molecular phylogeny is the branch of science which involves the study and analysis of amino acid sequences and comparison of the DNA of different species, thus establishing a common ancestor. The basic idea behind phylogeny is that distantly related species will have a great number of differences in DNA, while closely related species have lesser changes in DNA. To sum up everything we learned now, we can say that evolutionary relationships can be studied or established by study of homologous organs, study of analogous organs, study of fossils, changes in the DNA during reproduction. Evolution cannot be called a progress from lower forms to higher forms. It is basically forming more complex designs while the simpler ones also keep growing. Evolution is the generation of diversity with the help of environmental selection.